I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a series review. Those of you that regularly watch my channel probably know that I wasn't too keen on the 3 Doctor Who specials that were recently shown on Disney Plus, starring David Tennant and Catherine Tate, and brought to us by returning Doctor Who showrunner Russel T Davies. While the announcement of Davies' second tenure on Doctor Who had initially seemed like a promising course correction for the franchise back in 2021, to the dismay of many Doctor Who fans, Tennant's 3 specials just ended up being a hotbed of agenda peddling with a side order of identity politics. Now, if you're into that sort of thing, that's perfectly fine, but for me, those 3 Tennant specials were a major disappointment, and only once again highlighted how the franchise has become a lost cause. Still, Ruby Road was supposed to be a new Christmas special where actor Ncuti Gatwa would fully take over the role as the Doctor, or should I say, an additional Doctor, since the previous one is just presumably sitting around now in London or something. Anyhow, as a reviewer, even though I think this show has gone off a cliff in recent years, I still wanted to look at this episode with a clean slate to see how Ncuti Gatwa would do in this role, and to see who his new companion would be. Also, knowing that Russel T Davies can tell an interesting story when he wants to, in spite of all of his flaws, I still gave it a fair chance. In this video, I will be going over the general plot of Doctor Who Ruby Road, what I didn't like about the episode, what I did like about the episode, followed by my official score. The episode starts off with a cold open where decades ago some baby girl is left at a church, and you see the Doctor showing up and witnessing this. After the credits, the show then jumps to present day, and it turns out that this same orphan girl, called Ruby Sunday, is talking to real-life English television personality Davina McCall. Davina tells Ruby that she's going to try and find her birth mother through DNA testing. That same night, Ruby goes to a club and sees Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor dancing the night away. Why is the Doctor wearing a kilt and dancing very flamboyantly with a dude? You'll have to ask Doctor Who showrunner Russel T Davies about that. Anyhow, the Doctor starts talking to her, and it turns out that she's been having some bad luck since her interview with Davina McCall. After Ruby and her friends get into a taxi, it seems like some kind of little gremlin is trying to get their car crushed by a giant snowman display. But the Doctor uses his new sonic screwdriver to save them. Later, Ruby's adoptive mother, who takes care of foster children, asks Ruby to take care of a baby she was just given. But throughout the episode, it turns out that these gremlins that we saw earlier are interested in taking this baby so that they could turn it into a meal or something. And at this point, the Doctor, who has been monitoring the situation, randomly shows up. And when the gremlins take the baby aboard some kind of airship, the Doctor and Ruby go after it. After initially being apprehended and tied up by the gremlins, the Doctor, Ruby, and the gremlins all end up singing show tunes. After that, the Doctor and Ruby grab the baby and bring it back to the apartment. But when the ceiling starts to crack, the Doctor realizes that the gremlins have gone back in time, kidnapped Ruby as a baby, and altered the entire life of her adoptive mother. The Doctor then springs into action, goes back into time, manages to stop the gremlins from taking the baby, and returns Ruby to where she's supposed to be, therefore restoring the timeline. He also saves Davina McCall from being crushed by a tree. At the end of the episode, Ruby follows the Doctor outside, sees him get into his TARDIS, and then walks in. We then see a mysterious fourth-wall-breaking lady who seems to know what a TARDIS is, and I can only assume that her presence will be explained in a future episode. And that's where the episode ends. Now let's talk about what I didn't like about the Ruby Road special. For starters, I think that for a Christmas special, much like the previous 3 Tennant specials, it's rather underwhelming overall. To put it bluntly, none of these specials until now have felt all that special to me. I suppose that if this episode was made in the middle of a regular season by Russel T Davies back in the day, it would have been considered at best a filler episode, and probably not a very good one. It definitely doesn't feel like the type of episode that would start the tenure of a new Doctor. It's pretty much just kind of there, in my opinion. The idea of these gremlins, I didn't exactly love it to begin with, as it almost felt like it was part of a different franchise. But once they all start singing together, the show becomes absolute cringe. I know that Russel T Davies recently have said that he's looking to take this show away from science fiction and make it more fantasy-based, but in my opinion, this whole musical idea here just flat out sucks. I also think that the entire story story of this episode had a lot of conveniences in the writing. The way the Doctor and Ruby meet, the way he just appears out of nowhere and does stuff, it just feels like these things could have been set up better in the writing. And regardless, the entire scope of this episode just feels very small in general. As for the agenda stuff, I would say that in addition to the scene with the Doctor being overly, flamboyant at a nightclub, there's another moment in the episode where he says something about spending a long, hot summer with Harry Houdini, which seems to imply something there, although it's not fully elaborated on. I could be wrong, of course, but it sure seemed that way. In addition, Russel T Davies continues to quadruple down at this point on the timeless children. When the Doctor sees the baby in the crib, he starts feeling emotional because he himself doesn't know his own past. That's because after the Timeless Children episode, the Doctor now seems to be questioning his own identity. I also didn't love the whole making a meal out of the kids storyline. I'm not saying there's no way to explore this idea, but perhaps with everything that's happening in the world these days, that story idea may not have been the best creative route that Davies could have chosen right now. In spite of the issues I just mentioned, there were a couple of things that I didn't hate about the episode. For starters, I think that Gatwa is actually a competent actor. He was certainly more likable in this episode than in the previous one, and if nothing else, at least he's not just walking around in his underwear in this one. And there are some moments that Gatwa shows that he does have some kind of charisma and even a bit of charm, certainly more than Jodie Whittaker did during her entire time in the role. And I didn't dislike newcomer companion actress Millie Gibson as Ruby, and actually found her rather likable. And I would even go as far as saying that Gatwa and Gibson even have some decent chemistry together. But again, this is where Russel T Davies really manages to be very frustrating. He could have brought back David Tennant for 3 fun escapist episodes and then introduced Gatwa and Gibson without all of his agenda peddling. And I think it probably would have turned out better, because that's all fans really ever wanted. And the biggest shame here is that, while it's hard to imagine now, back in the day when he was in his prime, Davies could barely do any wrong. And now it just feels like he's either past his prime, way too political, or both. And still, with all of that being said, I will say that I like this episode more than anything I've seen during the Jodie and Chibs era. I mean, it's a very low bar to clear, but it still at least makes some type of minimal storytelling effort. But is it genuinely good? Not really, and it hasn't really changed my mind about the current state of the franchise. For me, the hashtag #RipDoctorWho still applies. But perhaps maybe some people will find a way to enjoy this new version. If I had to give this episode a score, and anything under 60 out of 100 is considered a fail, I would give this episode a 58 out of 100. I think that Gatwa and Gibson did the best with the material they were given, but ultimately, there's something about this episode that doesn't quite work for me, as it doesn't really feel like Doctor Who, and that's why it gets a failing grade. Regardless, I've seen that there's been some more people watching my Doctor Who videos recently, and I'm very thankful for that. If you happen to enjoy what I do on this channel, please consider subscribing and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.